Okay, we are finally in a place where we can get started on the dog himself. Yay! I'm so excited. He's just so darn cute that I just can't wait to start laying in those details and trying very hard not to bump my camera in the process. I'm left-handed, but my right hand is always coming over here and bumping the pole that the camera's on. So my apologies. I will make an effort not to jiggle the camera on you. So when I get to this point, when I've laid in my base colors, when I've started to work on the actual animal, this is where I go into the eyes first before I move on to any of the other bits and pieces. I want his eyes to come alive, and I want to get his eyes in there before I start putting the little wispy hair out in front, eyelashes and little nose hairs that kind of point toward the eye. I want to make sure that the eye itself is in there nicely. And in this particular little dog's eye, the reflections I see are in blue, not white. So I have a very, very light blue, almost, I don't know what it's called. Let's see, 435. It's an ultramarine blue light. So it's so light, it's almost a white looking color when you get it down on here. And then I have this violet looking blue, which is 430 on the Carbotella list, and it's ultramarine blue middle. Now again, if you only have general pencils or a cheaper brand, just find the absolute lightest blue you can possibly find. My general has a very light blue, and it's called light blue. So that's another option if you can't afford the set of Carbothellos. I'll put that general pencil in here too, so that, and maybe even use it a tiny tad. But, so that's where I'm going to get started. I'm going to first, well, let me get my black pencil. I'm going to first lay in the super black lines that I see around the outside of his eye, and I'm going to use my black general pencil to do that, even though it's a little harder lead, because I'm able to keep a little bit sharper, finer point on it. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is just get that black. It's quite a bit thicker on this side. There's actually a very thick point over here, and then it thins as we come down to the front. I hope you can hear me. My husband is working in the front room, and I forgot to message him to please turn down his radio, so I hope the doors are open between me and him, but they're, 40 feet to the other end of the house, so I'm hoping that it doesn't make a background noise, but I might put a bit of soothing classical music or something in the background of this anyway, just so we all have something to listen to a little bit while we work. I'm not sure. I know a lot of you probably like to take the tutorials and have something else on in the background as well, so I don't want to disturb that. But so I'm putting a lot of really dark marks in here because in the photo I'm seeing a lot of really dark bits. I'm not putting it down super thick. I'm going to use my blending stump to push it down in there so I can put some lighter marks over the top of it. But I'm making sure that I have that really dark bit around the eye. And I'm making it very, very, I'm trying to smooth out that line right there. Now, that same color we used for the dark, dark lines down here, I'm going to use, oh wait, that's the wrong one. Grab the wrong pencil, I think. I think that's black, 750, yes. It's this other guy. This is 635. It's that blister color we were talking about. It is a brown gray color. And I'm going to, I see a little bit of warmth. You know what? I actually think I'm going to switch to, I see some warmth over the top of this. So I actually think I want to try a warmer reddish color to warm up that black. So I'm taking this is 645, which is Caput Mortuum Red. It's just like a brick red, okay? So I'm going to move my glassine over because I'm already dragging my finger in his nose. And I'm going to run a bit of that reddish color over the black. I know when you see, you see a true black, you can be tempted to just leave it at true black, but you add depth when you overlay a warm color or a cool color over the top of that black. A lot of people use an eggplant color, like a super, super dark purple, but and I probably will at some point in this picture too, because there are some pinks and purples in here in the photograph. Sorry, I keep pointing that way because my photograph is over there. But it's a really good way to kind of warm up the look. Now, I see one more bit of black right in here. Where his pupil is, but there isn't much of it. I'm just putting a few little, he's looking out at something. You can't really see what, but it looks like trees and sky are reflected in his eyes, and I don't want to get too super realistic with what's reflected in there, but I want to make sure the black is in there nicely. And then I'm going to go in with all of these really great reflections. We've got one right here, and then another right next to it, and there's just a lot of stuff reflected in that little pooch's eye. These are the kind of things that we work on for a long time because it's going to give him personality. There's also a little bit darker, kind of that more violet blue in the reflections. He's looking up at the sky. There's probably the shadow of the person taking the picture in there. But we're, like I said, we're not trying to get too super realistic, but we want it to be realistic enough. And then there are some darker bits. There's some darker bits in here and up here. I think that's where I might use my super violet to get those dark bits in without them being black. There's a little line between these reflections. Looks like we've got trees back in there. Now I'm going to take my tiny little blending stump, clean side, and I'm going to blend. Let's blend this black around the edges too, the black with the brick over top, the dark color, just while we have it out. I don't want to widen the line, I just want to blend that out and then blend these light colors. And I'm going to put a little more of the light over the top. Let's use the general light blue since it's very thin. General has a harder lead, so it can sometimes make for good detail, though I don't think it's really trying to show up very well here, so we'll go with the softer Carbothello. Yeah, it seems to be. All right, I'm gonna blend you in. Just pushing it down at this point. I'm not scraping it, just pushing down the color into the tooth because we like to add lots of layers in our eyes. We want to make them really reflective. Now I'm going to take this blister color, this gray brown. Just use the darkest brown or umber that you can. And I'm going to make that next to the darkest color, next to the black. Because his eyes are so dark brown. That they look almost gray-black. And where we're going to blend this too, get more brown in there from other pencils. Blend that in. Making sure you're in shot. I have to stretch way up. My camera's sitting just a little too high for me to see in. My husband is out on an errand, so as soon as he gets back, I don't know how to turn his laptop down, which is what he's listening. He went on an errand. So as soon as he gets back, I'm going to tell him to turn that radio off or put his headphones on or something. Okay, so we've got that, and now I'm going to come in with this right at here at the bottom of his pupil. There are some lighter marks, almost beige, which is what I'm using. I'm using my General Beige pencil. And I'm just putting that bit of strip of reflection right there. Tiny bit lighter right there. Tiny bit up here. Blending stump at work. We're multi-layering this. As you see, the more of these shiny layers we get in here, the more realistic and wet his eyes will look. Now we're going to go a tiny bit lighter with the brown, and I'm saving all these colors as I pull them out of my carousel. I'm saving them all in my little jar here so that you'll have the full list of colors if you need them. But as I said, if you don't have this set, if you only have a small set like the Generals or another small set, just use the colors and blend them as close as you can to the tone you see. You don't have to have a multitude of colors, especially when you're using pastel pencils and pastel matte paper. I think I've already said once in this lesson, you can scrimp a little on your pencils early on or on your sticks. I like for pastel sticks, for example, I've got the half sticks of the little Mungyo chalk pastel set. That was my first set, and now I have nicer ones that are more the hand rolled kind of the Mungyos, but I'll get one tiny bit this lighter color. This is 615 on the Carbothellas, which is a dark ochre, just to help along those beige bits that we got in earlier. Okay, and then I'm going to take this again, press down, don't scrape to blend. Flip it over to blend the darker colors with the darker side of the stump. It actually kind of helps because it has enough pigment on the stump that it's actually helping darken the eye as I blend in the color. Now, before we completely finish this eye, let's move to his other eye so we can make sure we're getting the correct blend of colors. We're not quite finished over here. We have some white highlights that we want to put in, as well as maybe a little darker brown gray in there. But let's move over here and get this one started first before we finish the other. I'm getting my general black pencil again so that we can do this first I'm gonna, his actual eye color, the brown is actually inside this line. And then we have this really dark, you know, what women would kill for, this kind of beautiful coal black, or eye, I guess. This beautiful coal black outline, as if some being somewhere gave him natural eyeliner. And it's very adorable. And underneath this hair, there's a little bit of black as well. So we're gonna bring that all the way down. There will be hair that goes across it at a later time. And I'm also using this to kind of cover up his the little lines, though the drawing the hairs in will also cover up those white lines from the Seural transfer paper. Now this eye does not have a visible pupil. It's pretty much all glare and brown. However, up here in the corner, there will be hairs over this area, but up here in the corner, I just want to give it a little more contrast with the black, as if the hair and the glare weren't there, as if there would be his dark pupil there, just the hint of his pupil. Now I'm going to come in with the light blue. And this one's a little more complicated because there are hairs over the glare, so I'm just going to put in the glare where I see it. This is why I do the eyes before the fur, because got to have this underlayer underneath where the fur's covering over his eye. Now, in this particular eye, I am seeing a lot of this light blue, and then some of this darker, more blue-violet color. Even a little bit of an even darker violety blue. Let's go with 405, which is ultramarine. Get as close to a nice deep blue as you can. And I'm actually seeing a little ultramarine kind of color over here too, but just a touch, just a tiny touch, which will blend in a few minutes. And there's some right in here. Even though we're not finished, do you see how alive he's suddenly becoming just by getting his eye in there? It's really transformative. I love doing eyes, even though they terrify me, because if I get them wrong, then nothing else will go right until it's fixed. So I'm putting that in. Now I'm going to take this deep brown again, this brown gray blister, and I'm going to fill the rest of the eye in with this. There will be layers over the top, and then I'm going to get the blending stump and layer it in. Not a lot of dark up here above. There's more of a beigey reflections, so I'll put those in with the beige. Let's get that little blending stump and blend out. I'm just, like I said, pressing the pastel into the tooth. I'm not moving or scrubbing it in. I'm just kind of pressing it in with very light touch. Let's do that black too. Very light touch. And flip it over to blend those highlights. I'm going to get that red that I used on the other side to kind of warm up the black just a little bit. Blend it right down into the black. It might not seem like that does anything, but really in the long run you will find that it helps a lot to have those bits of warm or cool colors in amongst your black. For example, when we're down here in the nose, if you saturate the photograph, well, you've got the reference photograph that I've already saturated. If you saturate your photograph, you'll see in the nose all those little bumpy things are blue and violet, and they're not just black and gray. There's a lot of light blue and violet and really cool colors in there to make that thing pop. So we want to make sure we make him as 3D as we can, because we want him to look alive. I'm taking the beige pencil, because up here at the top in these highlights, there's actually quite a bit of that color. It's a little too much highlight, so I'm going to come back in here with this super dark blue, darken that highlight up a little bit because he's looking at the sky. And then that tiny bit, wait, not the black, the gray brown, tiny bit of that pulled down into those highlights as well. I'm using this to give him a little more of a pupil than the photo does. Sometimes you have to correct a little bit. When the photograph doesn't really show you what you're looking for, because sometimes even if you don't see a pupil in the reflection of the animal's eye in the photograph, it's going to look kind of strange if he doesn't have one. So I'm going to lighten. Actually, I think I am going to, and you can follow this if you'd like, or do your own thing. I think I am going to give him a bit more pupil, just to liven things up a little bit and to correct for what the photo reflection isn't showing. Sometimes you just have to do that or it just looks odd. Blending all of that in by pressing down. Same with the blue. Now, because I have a little bit of each eye done but not quite finished, let me blend that violet in that I put over here too. I see on this eye that there is a very, very thin white line just under the black. And then there's a very, very thin gray line saddling that white as lower eyelid. I'm using this dark gray in the general pastel, though I might grab 708 is warm gray to help out with that line. I'm going to come back in here with the white again because we want that really nice and sharp. And now I need to make the black just inside that white line sharp again. Just tiny, tiny thin line. This is where things can get tough sometimes, but we'll get it. We'll get it. And down here, he's going to have some black under his fur and some very light gray as well beneath that darker gray line. He doesn't have this on the other side because the fur is completely covering his lower lid, where his little lower tiny eyelashes would be. So we're going to do that just so once we've laid the fur in, we can see to add finishing detail at the very end of this. I'm noticing, and this is one of the things that I like to teach is as I'm doing this tutorial, I'm also learning myself. I'm also catching things and saying, oh, well, there's an even darker, just as dark a bit right here on the inside lid under this fur. And then there's a really reddish bit under the fur. So I'm taking that brick reddish color back in. It's 645, the Caput Mortuum Red. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not. I have never, ever heard that color. I assume it's not based in the English language, but still has Latin roots. So I'm going to leave this for now. I think it looks really nice. At the very end of the portrait, I'm waiting to put the main highlights back into the eyes until the very end of the portrait because using the glassine while working over here and the glassine sitting on his eyes might cause a little more blending and blurring, so we might have to put sharper details back in. But as far as I'm concerned, these eyes look fantastic right now. Just need a couple finishing touches. So we're going to get into the fur now. Use your glassine paper or your tracing paper if you have it to move over. We're going to start on this side, but we're going to do one pencil at a time all the way across the dog, and then again the next pencil all the way across the dog. I kind of like to work on the whole animal at once instead of tiny sections at a time, partly because I'm a little ADD, and so I might have a little trouble thinking through this, and then hours later when I'm working on this section, I've completely forgotten the colors that I'm using and the tones that I'm using over here. So I'm going to move the black pencil out of my way. I'm going to get the colors here that I'll be using in the fur. And we have whites. We have the ivory. We'll be doing a lot of ivory. I'm trying to set something here so my pencil stopped rolling away. There. Need an eraser. I'm putting the gray away. I don't think we will be using it actually around his muzzle in the fur. Duh. He's got a lot of little blue-gray bits in here, and he's got a lot of little blue-gray bits in his nose. But we're going to start working on his fur. Well, you know what? We're going to start working on his nose. Because again, there's a lot of fur going across and in his nose, a lot of little bits and pieces. So we might as well do his nose next. That's the second part of the livening of him. So let's get, you want your black, you want a light gray, you want a light blue, you want potentially an ultramarine sort of blue, like a blue violet. Or you could use the violet if you have the general set. And is that it? We've got black, we've got blue, we've got a little violet, we've got a little gray. I think this is good for his nose. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure the nostrils are colored the way they are shaped the way they need to be. This was all laid in, if you recall, with pan pastels. So now we're going to go in and fill in the detail. So I see that his nostril kind of comes in a little bit over here. I'm going to gray that in a tiny bit. I need a dark gray too. I need a super dark Payne's gray of some kind. Let's do 726 is a cold gray. He has a little bit up here. Part of his nostril goes in like this before it comes out. So it's kind of a little dent. So I'm just putting this in here as a guideline. And it's a good base being dark gray. There might even be a little brown gray in there. So I'm going to keep this crazy gray-brown bister color in the mix too, because I see on the inside of his nostril there are little bits of brown fleck as well. But this is kind of the outline of where his nostril goes. Now let's look at the other one. The other one kind of arches up like this and then comes down in more of a curve here. And then down here it kind of does a little jog to make it almost, actually going to go up a little sharper here, almost a little bit triangular. We'll get that in there like that. Now we'll get the black in the blacky spots. Got my photo embiggened. I need to move down a little bit. Oh yes. He's so cute, this little guy. Okay. So we're really making the inside of his nostrils very dark. And again, I'm going to go over that the black, so it's not just black, because it looks a bit to me like there might even be a bit of deep violet or blue in that nose. So I'm going to use my ultramarine, the cooler color, over the top of that black. Not a lot, just a little. I'm going to use the blending stump to blend that in. I'm going to get a little bit bigger blending stump for his nose. Some people like to use just their fingers, but I need, in some places, you really need a more fine point. So I'm going to press that in. These are actually, these and the little tip we're going to get down here on the bottom of his nose are actually going to be the only close to true black spots on his nose. The rest of his nose is very textured. And on this side, I don't see anything in here outside of kind of that eggplanty looking black. On this side, however, there are a couple little spots inside of his nose that are kind of a lighter color, like a dark gray. Just going to blend that in a little bit. Now, one thing I want to rectify before moving on with the rest of his nose is that when I put it in the base colors of Pan Pastels, I wasn't really going for the perfect shape of his nose. And he's got a very interesting little point down here on his nose, and that's part of who he is as a dog. So we want to make sure, I'm going to kind of just eyeball the exact down between his nostrils that I need to be for this little point. He has a very topographical nose, and he's got an adorable little point down there. And we want to make sure that that is definitely a part of our portrait. Quite a few little black bits coming out too, gray bits, so we're going to go ahead and put those in there just honestly to make sure we've got the shape nicely done. It even feels over here as if there's a little inlet, like there's a little inner curve right there under that nostril, though we don't see it over on this side. So he's got a little divot right there, and we want to make sure the shapes are nice. So I'm just very lightly shading that black in there, because this is the only other part of his nose that has that almost true black shading in the picture. It sounds like I'm pushing much harder than I am, because pastel matte is very textured and makes that scrapey sound, but I'm not. I'm very lightly moving in tiny little circles to get this true black area filled in. Now I'm going to pick it up to look at, because I want to make sure I have that shape as close to the real thing as is humanly possible. Okay, I think once we get the other colors and tones in, it's not that pointy, then we will have it. I call this the ugly phase because it's not perfect right now, but we want to make sure that those shapes are okay. That the outside of his nose, the outline of his nose matches him. And I just put some of these little darker hairs out just as a guideline for later when I'm laying in his fur. That those are the dark bits. Black kind of goes out there too. All right. So we have his nose shape now, heading down toward his adorable little mouth. And we are going to now pull out, let's go with the super dark blue, whatever blue, ultramarine, or any kind of blue violet that you might have. I'm trying to make sure that I'm using as few colors as I can. I don't want to pull out another blue than the one I used up here. So I'm going to use this blue. And this is also, these are also the two blues, if you recall, that I used up in the windows. This light blue and this ultramarine blue. And it's always a good idea to have some of the colors in your background reflecting a little bit in the color of your animal, because that helps tie the whole thing together. Now, I'm just honestly not trying to get any outlines right now. I'm not trying to do anything right now except shade some of this ultramarine where I see it. There's a little bit down here. I'm going to blend in a minute because right now that black is sitting on top of the paper and not pushed down into the tooth. So it's not allowing me to get much of the blue transferred on, but that's okay. We don't need a lot of this blue color. We just want it in the undercoat because it is in it. I see it in there in the nostrils. Okay, got all that blue. Getting my blending stump. I'm going to push that stuff, the blue and the black, down into the tooth so we can get more of those lighter little dots and divots and fun little things up on the surface. All right, now I'm going to use this light blue to get started on making those little lines and pockmarks all over his nose. There's quite a bit of, and just make sure you're kind of doing your texturing in the direction that you see those marks going. He's got a little bit of this shine and curvature coming out of his nostrils. And I'm doing all of this in the light blue because that's what's reflecting in the photograph, is this kind of light blue color. And I'm using the sides of it because I'm trying to make myself a point, because then with the point I can go in with these other little bits of texture I see on the edges. Just little hills and valleys of this light blue color. I'm not going to do that fur bit across his nose. In fact, I may eliminate that entirely. Not the one that arches up here, but the one that just cuts his nose in half. I may just eliminate that bit of hair just to make sure it doesn't look like a slash across his nose. But we'll see when we get to that point. So I see a lot of little dots and bits of movement over here leading up to the nostril. Again, we're not doing photorealistic, but we want it to be realistic. We want it to reflect this animal's personality and markings. So if you are standing back from it, it looks photorealistic to some extent, but when you get up very close to it, it doesn't. So I'm just putting these tiny little marks and divots in this light blue color where I see them. And they're all the way into the, right next to that black. I'm not trying to be exact, I'm just, if you've done many dogs' noses, they almost all have these little circular divots on them. So we're just looking at the shapes and the movement and the direction. You know, we're making, and the direction is making his nostrils look more round. I'm going to go back in with some darker grays and blues too, so don't worry, he's not going to look like he's got some kind of little spotty disease on his nose. We're just getting that texture in. Nose. And there's a little of this reflected light blue down in that fur too, underneath his nose. So we're just going to put that in as kind of an underlayer when we start laying the more cream color fur over the top. We want to make sure we have enough of this blue-gray up next to the nose showing through. I'm making them short. He's got long hair under on his upper lip, but the blue doesn't go all the way down. It just kind of hangs out underneath here. intermingling it with the darker marks. Now I'm going to take my blending stump and I'm going to use the side that I've used gray. And I'm going to blend that layer. But again, I'm just pushing it in and kind of blurring it out a tiny bit because we don't want it to be too sharp. But I don't want to lose every bit of detail by blending the whole thing down hard. The more you blend, the more layers you need to put over the top. However, the more you blend, the more texture you get as well, and the more realistic you look. Often the more layers, the better. Not always. But to get that real texture that looks almost 3D. I'm going to blend and add the next layer, blend, add the next layer, and then the very top layer is the only one that really will show a lot of detail. And frankly, in the photo on his nose, if you look very closely and blow it up a little bit, there's really not a lot that doesn't look blurred in the photograph either. So you can see we've already got a much more realistic nose just with with black and that dark blue and then this light blue. Now we're going to go in with a little of the dark gray and kind of do the same thing up next to those blue bits, not over top of them, kind of like we did with the wood grain. You don't want it to be covering up that blue. You just want it to be helping enhance the shapes you put in with that blue. It's not easy. These are very tiny little marks, so you need a magnifying glass. You may want to get one, but I'm nearsighted, so I wear glasses to see things from far away, like road signs and such. But I can see well up close, but not through my glasses. So I have to look, I look like a librarian. I'm constantly looking over the top of my glasses. My friend, who is also my eye doctor, told me at one point I probably could use bifocals, but I don't really need reading glasses. I can see just fine up close. And I'm a klutz. It is not a good idea to have two different ways of seeing through my glasses for me, because I will be the first person to look through the wrong lens and trip over the curb and break my ankle. Ask me how I know. I told my husband I come from a long line of genetic klutzes, and he didn't believe me. I'm coming back in with a little more of the blue. Until we went to visit my mother and my younger sister and her 5 children, and we all took a walk together. And he said he didn't really believe that I was, I'm all over the sidewalk. If I'm leaning toward him to talk, I list toward him and bump into him. And he noticed that my entire family did the same thing. He actually had to back up because our dog was with him as well, so that nobody tripped over anybody, including the dog, because they're all over the place too. And they're famous klutzes as well. So I thought that was kind of funny. Now I'm taking the very light gray, coming in to try to enhance that blue a little bit, just a little. Notice I don't need a super sharp point even to get these tiny little sharp lines. I'm just making more like little half circles, like I can see in the dog's nose, just these little half circles. Now I've got those cool colors in there. I want to come back in with this blister, this dark brown gray. You can also use a dark brown like a burnt umber or something of that nature. Remember, whatever you have in your arsenal of pastel pencils to use. And I'm going to warm this up a little bit because here in the middle, well, first I'm going to blend that in because it's sitting on top of the tooth. Remember, blend your stuff. I'm going to use this Q-tip this time, this cotton swab. Not Q-tip, cotton swab. I'm just going to push all that texture I've already made down in there. And then we've got 2 layers to go. We're going to have this brown layer coming in just to get some dark, warmer stuff in here. And up in here. And guess what our final layer is going to be? Probably going to use this dark gray a little too. So a little, I've warmed up the undercoat, so now we want to get some of these divots back in here with the dark color. I'm just pushing them in there again, not scrubbing, just pushing. And I think we've got enough of these little divots in the undercoat of his nose, so now we're looking at the final result. And the final result is going to consist primarily of light blue and maybe a little of the light gray. And I'm going to get those little divoty highlights back that I've lost with all my layers. So we're going to get these little curves of the nose back in here. And somebody might ask, well, why did you do it in the first place if you knew you were just going to cover it up? But I didn't just cover it all up. We're building layer upon layer, so you can still see some of that light blue down there, and it's also providing us a guideline for where to put our finishing marks back in. But I'm just making these tiny little finish marks, and I'm not going to blend them out so much as press them in with my finger. Notice that some of these in the center of his nose are really just kind of straight slant lines rather than completely rounded little bits. But I'm just kind of insinuating them. I'm not trying to make them perfect. I'm making it lighter up here because the reflection of the sky is hitting him much harder here on his nostril, here over this side, and up here on the top of his nose where the sky would be reflecting the most, because that's where he's pointed. His eyes and his nose are looking up. So, and there's a little sky reflected in his eyes already, so we want that to be reflected in his nose. I still feel as if there's more blue in there, so I'm just getting the next blue up. I'm not sure what that is in the general pencils, but just a little bit darker than the light blue. And I'm going to come in here and help out with that instead of the light gray, because we really want to keep that blue in here because it shows in the photo. Do you always need to do the color that the photo is in? No. However, I like to try as often as I can to put those, especially when you're working in a black space. You see a black dog's black nose and you think black, but you don't realize that black is one of many colors that you're seeing in there. And it looks kind of funny because he doesn't have his fur around his nose yet, but trust me when I say once we get all the fur in, it's going to be gorgeous. And it's going to look very, very real. I'll put a little, actually, let's go black. A little tiny bit of black here and there, not very many places. Back up into, and again, we're just showing that little bit of divoty texture around him. I'm going to use my finger this time to just push all that in. Make sure I clean my finger off so it doesn't blacken up the thing. And I think our nose is pretty complete. I think it looks pretty good. I'm going to grab a wet wipe since I used my finger. I like to keep these handy. I don't ever want to use one of these and then touch this right away, because I don't want any of the chemicals in the wet wipe to transfer to my picture. But I do want to wipe the pastel off my fingers before we go on to the next bit. And that next bit is going to be making sure we get the shape of his mouth right in the deep colors before we start the fur. So let's get that started. I'm going to start with the black, and I'm looking over here, and he has a little bit more of a, not smile so much as kind of a grimace, but his mouth does curve down. You hear clattering in the background. That's my hubby feeding the cat. She likes to be fed at regular intervals. I don't understand. But anyway, so we want to make sure, notice how in the photo the curve of his mouth kind of does go down here. The black kind of goes down a little further here and up in here, and we want to make sure, I know it looks silly right now and looks like too much black right now, but that's because we're going to be laying other fur over the top of that. We just want to make sure it doesn't cover up his actual expression, because his expression is pretty darned adorable. I mean, for real. I'm scrubbing in a little blacker in here. And this time I'm seeing more blues in his fur up near that black than I was seeing violets earlier. So we're going to take this ultramarine blue and also help that black to blend in a cooler sort of way. Taking my blending stump, and I'm going to use it even to help with the spikes of the fur. I know this looks terrible right now, but when we start laying in the fur around his mouth, it will look much, much better, because all of this black and gray is the under. His mouth, but we just want to make sure we have enough of it to run lighter colors over. That's another thing I love about pastel pencils. Frankly, over colored pencils. I enjoy colored pencils, but to me they become very tedious because you have to be very careful, because it's difficult to layer lighter over really dark. On pastel mat it's much easier, even with colored pencil, but it's still difficult with pastel pencils. As long as you have a really good grainy toothy paper like Pastel Mat or UArt, a lot of people like UArt sanded paper, a lot of people like velour paper. I've tried both, and just Pastel Mat just happens to be my favorite. You might prefer a different paper. Just try out one, but once you get one you like, why give it up? Okay, so now that we've got his mouth kind of in a creepy way shaped in, we're going to start laying in hair. To finish off his ear and the hairs, we're going to be using this very light pink, which is a flesh color, 681 in Carbothello. You can, like I said, you can use the lightest pink you can find in whatever pastels you have, or mix a pink and ivory. We're going to be using ivory, and we may end up using the bright white, but for now we're going to go across, and we're going to start up here with this ear, and we're going to move across his head, just laying in these colors over the top of the base we already have. Now I'm going to start drawing the hair, because we've laid in enough tone below that we don't really need a lot of tone up here. I'm probably going to do this ear and then move over to the other ear before doing his forehead, because as you can see in the photo, this bit arches up and lays over in front of the ear hair. So I'm just going to start. He's got a couple little wisps up here. And this is where we can really have a good time. You just follow where you see his hair going. And don't be afraid to cluster with the one color that you're using those hairs. But remember, I see a little flesh too, a little pinky ivory, you could call it. I see a little bit there. And this is another reason I like to keep my picture on something I can move, because it's easier to get those little fine end wisps if you're pulling the pencil toward yourself. Are we still in frame? Yes, we are still in frame. So I'm even going to, on my computer flip my little picture a little bit so that it's going the same direction I am. And I'm going to keep pulling out these wispy, adorable hairs. There's even a little bit of the super light gray color that I see, especially right in here and right up into here. Not much. There will be here too, but for right now, there's a little bit of this super light gray. Use, and then just keep on bringing his little wispy ear hair out here. I'm going to blend this layer, so remember there will be another layer. And I'm actually seeing, as I'm looking at the ear, as I'm pulling out the wisps, there is where the light is hitting his ear on the edge. His ear does have a shape. We don't want to just put hairs in. We want to make sure the shape of his ear is followed. Sometimes when you turn the picture a different direction, you can see that better, as I said before. So he's got, his ear is shaped like this. This is the ear itself. It's almost kind of human-y. And his ear actually goes like that. So we want to make sure that those hairs, even though they come out past the ear, that we have his ear shape in there, right? And I'm seeing pink, so this light flesh or a very light pink color would be good to have in here. It's a little too dark, that pink that I had put with the pan pastels, so I'm going to lighten it up with this flesh color. And I'm going to take my cotton swab, blend it, I see some gray, maybe even a little darker than this in there, but not too terribly dark, just a warmer gray. Out. These are all under layers of that ear color. The bright hairs will go over the top. So we want to make sure we have enough dark tones underneath to look that our lighter hairs that we're pulling out will turn up, will show up. So, got some darker tones down there. Getting my little cotton swab. Where did you go, little cotton swab? I rolled it away. I'm going to blend those out so that we can pull more layers over the top. Again, it's not about perfect colors. It's about values. It's about the tones and the values that we use. So I'm going to do this again. interlacing the ivory with the pink flesh color. Some people have difficulty with long-haired dogs because their hair's not just straight. Sometimes you see a little squiggle, see little movements and tangles. So a lot of times at the very end of the hair, tiny bits will curl up. Okay, using the Q-tip. Again, we're not finishing this off right now. We're going to move across to the other ear. I'm going to turn this back up toward me and see kind of what I've got at present. Still a little pinky, but we'll go back in and fix that in a little bit. Let me turning my photo back around. Ow. I hit it one too many times. Went right back where I was. So we are definitely coming back in here with more, and we're definitely, well, let's do it right now. I definitely want to keep the shape and the tones of the edges of his ear so that they don't get lost. All right, now let's move to the other side. We want to use similar tonal values. We've already got a lot of dark tones in here, so I don't think we need too much of that. I don't see a lot of gray. Now, those of you who are right-handed, you're probably going to want to turn your picture to pull toward you. Since I'm left-handed, this is my natural way to stroke the fur. So I'm going to take this light gray and just give myself that outline of where his head fur will spill down, because it's kind of a light gray in the photo. Just going to get a little bit of that there, and then there's a little of that same value in here, and a little bit of the darker value in here, and a little bit of this kind of a dark umber in the under parts of his fur. All the way to here, that's where his lighter hair will come out. We'll cover that up. But there's just a little bit of these dark tones and these gray tones where you think it's white, it's usually gray, ivory, that fleshy pink color. doing a little underpainting that the Pan Pastels didn't quite complete. And then we're going to find the edge of that ear and make sure that it stands out as an actual ear. This side goes like this, but his ear is right here, regardless of the hairs that come out. You have puppy ear right there. All right, now we can bring this pink and ivory back in, this flesh color, and it looks like he's got two different levels of grooming here. We've got this one, doesn't come out too far, but comes out past the post. It actually comes out quite a bit past the post, doesn't it? And we've got this inside bit. I forgot to blend. What was I thinking? Kind of another thing I love, that pastels are so forgiving. I've painted in acrylics for a long time too, and one of the things I love about acrylics is that they can be so forgiving. Once you've blended a layer, if you don't like it, you can just let it dry and do it again. Pastels are similar, and also you go dark to light. Pastels are similar, which is why I like them so much, because you can also go dark to light. So we've got his little ear coming out further than we had it. This one over here I see curves a little more outside, but I don't want to mess up the line of his face too much. So we may rectify a little bit of that too. All right. Before I started doing this, before I started teaching and doing online tutorials, I was kind of afraid to do them out loud. I thought I would just do the portrait, and then if it turned out nicely, I would voice over, because I didn't want people to see if I was making mistakes or if I had an issue that I needed to fix or something of that nature, because obviously the teacher has to be perfect, right? So it took me a while to realize, and by watching other artists and teachers, I know Bonnie Snowden allows people to hear her mistakes as she works, and not that she makes very many of them, but and other people who used to voice over in the beginning of their tutorials have now started, by request of their sponsors and their patrons, to be more conversational and to record as they went, because number one, people like to hear the scratching of the pencil sometimes, but also sometimes it's nice to know that you can make some kind of error and fix that error for the people that you're teaching, because I want you all to know that there's never an end to learning and to making yourself an expert in something. There's never an end. So it's always going to be a learning process, always and always and always. So I want to make sure that you guys know, that you all know, guys, gals, and all, that it's a learning process. Every single picture you do, whether it's a landscape, whether it's an animal, whether it's a human, every single piece you do has a learning element to it. Even if you've done 100 dogs that look like this breed, every single one is a new and learning experience. What I teach is, number one, that you just keep working until you learn it. You learn to see differently. That's what I teach, is how to see differently, and then get your hand to move differently, and add what you see. So that's kind of my my big deal, is to get over the thought that I have to be perfect as the person giving the tutorial in order for anybody to get anything out of the tutorial. I want to make sure you see my mistakes, warts and all. He's got a little extra hair out there. We'll get more wispies in later. But I'm going to move back over here, but I'm not going to turn it this time, just to make sure I have the right dimensions of this little guy's ear. He does come out a little bit more, but I don't want, it's not going to affect the look of the dog to bring him out further. I think he's out far enough, actually. What really affects is more getting in those shades and tonal values that we see. So moving back over to this other ear. Adding those little bits that identify the photo, including that these bits are a little grayer, in warm gray, not like this is an old dog. It's just the reflection again in his fur. He's not just a little rusty colored dog. He's got some character. Now, before we completely finish the fur lines out here, now we're going to come into his little forehead hair. And because I see a lot of grayish reflection here, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to make this arch where his hair is so dapper and is combed down the side in front of his ear. Such a dapper little guy. And in my undercoat, I put a lot more of this red sienna than really needs to be in his upper coat, but I did that because we want as many lighter bits over that as we can get. He doesn't really have any strays down in here. They just kind of nicely, prettily fold over. Got some grays out here. This time I'm going to do the whole layer of this light gray all the way across his head before we move on to the next color. I just wanted to get his ears similar. So just wherever you see in the photograph the grayish color, just add it in. And again, don't sweat the idea that your colors might not be exactly the same as in the photograph. We're looking for a likeness and values here. So obviously his hair isn't really blue or pink or flesh colored. However, the values in his fur are. I should say fur, but I don't know. My dog doesn't have fur. He has hair. He doesn't shed. Do you all have animals at home to inspire you? I'm going to keep moving this gray in every area that I see quite a bit of it. It's already beginning to look more like his coloring. This is going to be a blending layer, so we're going to blend this in. So again, don't worry too much about getting perfect hairs because you're going to blend them out. Right in here is where we need to be a little careful because these are going to have lighter hairs coming up over the top of them. So we're just moving from the back of his head toward the front is what we're doing. And his hairs are quite a bit longer up in this area. And they arch over this way. And then down into the gray we already put in here. Grab that little bit of darker, warmer gray, because over in this area it gets darker. You know what? Stop it, Kristen. Let's stay in this gray until we get this gray in. Yeah? Starting to put little bits of these colors closer to his eye because there are bits of these colors closer to his eye. They get more red in there as well, but also some of these lighter bits. Now, a lot of people insist that when doing a pastel, you always do darkest to lightest, but sometimes you like that mid-tone value in there first. It's not the lightest and it's not the darkest, just so you can get an idea of how it's flowing, and because that's one of the main tones you see. Coming right along, even though this is just the first layer. I'm going to go ahead and bring this light gray everywhere I see it in his whole face. We're going to do it on the whole thing, and then we're going to go to the darker value gray and do that after we've blended this layer in. Okay, now that we're sharpened, let's get back into laying in the gray. This is just the light gray undertones in this adorable little guy's fur. I'm not too concerned yet with details, though. There are a couple up in here, but we'll get those when we do our final layer. I'm more concerned right now with just getting the tones of this gray all over his little face. There's quite a lot of it right here. There's some of the darker gray in here too, but try a bit of this lighter color as well. And it seems to extend over this way. I'm going to put some of that dark gray in the next layer. Doop. All right, lots of this gray coming out from the nose, and I did overlap the nose a little bit. I'll fix that later. Let's get some down in here. There's not a lot of the grayish color through this part of his face. It's more cream colors and even kind of a yellow tan, like that sand color in the general pencils. So I'm not going to put too much of it in there, but there's a lot in here. A little chilly in here. The sun's gone down. And I'd like to turn on my little space heater, but I don't really want the buzzy noise. I really don't like when they do time change here in the US. It gets dark at 4:30 in the afternoon now, and I hate that. I hate it. Makes me mad, drives me crazy. So I kind of wish they'd do away with this turning the clocks forward, like spring forward, fall back, turning the clocks back in the fall, because then when you're sleeping, the sun's out, because ain't no way I'm getting up at 5:30 in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning just to see the sun. Or, like I said, you work and you're driving home or coming home or doing your art in the dark, and it's right now it's almost 7 o'clock. So it's been dark for a while, but I just do not like it. Lots of gray. And here, again, I'm just laying in this layer, and then we're going to use the cotton swab to push it in, and then start with the little bit of darker gray marks where I've noticed them happening. Sometimes, like I said, when you do a lighter layer, you end up seeing where those grays are. Right in here, quite a lot of these light gray tones. He's starting to come alive. Yay! Now that he's getting hair. Lots of bits of gray down in here. I'm going to try to pull it up like this so I get a sharper edge in toward the mouth. Pulling it a little bit into the black, which is annoying in some ways because then the black gets on my pastel stick. On my pencil, and I have to keep wiping it off on the paper towel over here so it doesn't make little black marks in his chin. Not that it matters too much because there are actually a few little black marks underneath the light. But I don't want it to look muddy either. I just love how his hair lays. It's so cute. He's got his little mustache looking hair up here, and then he has this chin little goatee going on here, and then a little bit more on his neck down below that's a little lighter. He's just a cutie, that's all. I'm not going down into his body yet. We'll do that. Well, maybe. Let's, whoop, sorry, once again. Well, there really is quite a bit of this tone down there, so why not move down into there? His body is much more in shade and grayer, beigey tones than anywhere else on him. So I'm probably going to start moving his hair. I also have a little bit of this sandpaper that I sometimes will sharpen my points on if I want a little bit sharper point after I've sharpened. I don't use it very often because if I just keep drawing on the sides of the pencil, I'll create a point, but sometimes you want a better point. So I see his fur moving this way and then curving back this way. And then over here, his chest is filling this space a lot more than I did with the pen pastels. So we're going to bring it down. Just keep following the curve and curl of his hair. Bring out some of his paw hair too, especially to cover up that tracing. So let's keep moving. This is actually the lighter bits of his fur down here. Definitely some darker tones we're going to be putting in down here. But at least right now in this layer, can start playing with the directions, the multiple directions that his hair is going. this away. And then turns back this direction. And I must not have blended that very well when I put the pan pastel down, because it's actually trying very hard to fight my layer. So I'm pushing that in. Let's see if I can get it better. There we go. Just keep an eye on the photograph and make your pencil strokes, even if they're an underlayer, which this is. We're going to blend it out, but even though it's an underlayer, you want to make your pencil strokes move in the direction that you see his fur actually moving. A little darker between his leg and body, and then not a lot of that light color back there in the shadow, but just a little. And then a little out here. Now I know that the photograph doesn't show this much of him sticking out, but it's a little awkward, so I'm gonna take a little artistic license here and bring a little more of his rump out to the side. It's already, his head is already caricature size compared to his body due to the angle of the camera. So to rectify that, I just brought his body out a tiny bit further. Not a lot. I still like, even though he looks caricatured, because of the type of dog he is. He's just downright adorable. So now I'm going to take my cotton swab, find a little gray side, and just pull that gray down into the tooth of the paper. Yes, I know, it gets rid of much of the detail, but that's okay, because we're going to be laying detail in every layer, and then the top layer won't get blended in. I might push it in, but it's not going to get blended out like I'm doing with this. His coloring is already looking better. The values, the tonal values, we're already seeing the lay of his fur. And honestly, a layperson might actually decide to stop somewhere near here, thinking it looks perfectly fine already. And I would agree to an extent if you wanted a very loose painterly picture, but it doesn't resemble him because the tonal values aren't here. And the more layers like this you do, the more three-dimensional your animal's going to look. So a lot of people are like, what am I doing wrong? Why doesn't this look right? Why doesn't this look real? And my response is almost always has nothing to do with, oh, well, you messed up the eyes, or, oh, well, you messed up this and you need to fix this. It's, well, it looks wrong because you're not finished yet. You're just not finished yet. You've still got more layers to add. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're like, well, why isn't mine as realistic as this other person's? It's because you're not finished. That's all there is to it. You're just not finished yet. So that's that gray. Now I'm going to come in with the darker gray. And this time we'll start down here since we're down here already. That might not be darker enough. I think I might need to go with a darker gray. And get a few of those. Now there's some darker browns down in there too, and I'm going to bring out that gray brown I've been using as well, especially down here in the body, because we don't want, honestly, the body to be as detailed as the face. We want the focus to be on that adorable little face. However, we also don't want it to be so blurred out because the paw is really cute up on that rail too. So we really do want to get some detail in there. So now we are on a darker gray layer. I'm just putting it in the cracks and mainly to differentiate it in the shading, to get the difference and the line, the demarcation between his leg. Lots of dark shadows under his chin, between his leg and his belly. So that's why we're doing that. This is going to get blended in. Don't worry. I know it looks kind of ugly. We're just getting those undertones in there, and we're going to blend them right in. All right, now we're going to come up here and find, there aren't very many, but there are a few of these darker tones. A bit more right in here. A bit more right up in here. And you could use a darker brown or this gray. Let's see, which one is this? This is warm gray, which is why it works well with the browns. It's not a cool color. It's a warm color, so it has a tiny bit of probably red pigment in it to warm it up. Just gonna put a little bit of that in there. A little bit down here. Not a lot, because there isn't a lot. And then let's look. We've got a little bit of the darker tone gray happening in the ear. And that'll help a lot to get rid of that overly pink spot that happened when laying in the pan pastels. Just helps a little. I know there is not much gray there, and that's going to get blended way in, but I just want to keep that hairline separated from the ear. Here's another spot where we've got some deeper color, and we need to put this deeper color in, because if we don't, the super light colors that we're putting over the top of this light gray won't show up. You just won't be able to see it. So we want some contrast here so we can see those hairs. Now he's got a little probably a dirty bit of fluff right there. And then some of the grays in here. Got a little bit. We're just darkening it up a little bit so when we put in the lights, they'll be much more easily seen. Plus, we want to see all those little fun bits. Now, on this side of his nose, he has quite a bit of this gray bit, but there's still some of the flesh colors and the red colors showing through, so I'm just putting that in here to remember later. Let's stay at the top of the head. We still have some darker areas right in here, and then up here where he's got this extra bit of eye fluff. And then he has a few actual strands of that darker gray up here. My husband's being so nice. He's trying to walk around really quietly, even though it's evening and I need to be joining him in filling out and sending Christmas cards. So this is the last layer that we're going to do right now. So I can go be with my family, which consists right now of my husband, our little dog, and our cat, our calico cat, Charlotte. Charlie, she goes by. She likes the androgynous names. So I'm just darkening this undertone, as I said, with this gray. Getting quite a lot in these areas here. So the lighter colors will look really, really light when we come back over with them. Kind of almost like a monochrome shadow we're creating. And don't worry, as I said, we're going to blend it in. I think that's enough. A handy dandy messy cotton swab. And see what's happened is you don't see individual hairs so much as it just adds depth and dimension. And it pushes the pigment down into the tooth, so you'll have more to play with. Looking pretty good so far. Not completely blending it away, but just pushing it in. You can still see the hair, you can still see the direction it's going. All right, next layer coming up. Okay, we're getting near the home stretch now. So we've got some dark spaces. Before we start putting in our brightest whites, we have some dark spaces around his eyes and around his mouth that we need to lay in some more deeper colors in. So if you have the Carindat or the Carbothello pencils, number 625, the burnt umber, is what I'm going to use for the darker darks. And if you only have the generals, I would go with Van Dyke Brown. They're the closest together in tone as far as darkness. So we're going to go start that. I'm going to start over here with his eye. And again, I'm seeing a couple little places that need to be darker again up here in his ear. So I'm just going to put those in right now, just to give contrast when we go in with the light lights over the top of these. So I know there's probably multiple dark colors in the background, but the values are what we're going for. And this particular brown has the right dark to light ratio in value to get a good lightness. So I'm just going to put that in there. Then I'm going to go in here and I see quite a bit of dark in the hairs up above his eye. I'm also going to be using, to get those darks, these colors. It's burnt sienna. If you have the General's pencils, it's 675 is French red ochre, or you could use the burnt sienna 670 in these pencils to get the more orangey colors too. But for right now, let's get these darkest browns in. And then there's quite a bit in the browns and oranges down below. And a little bit out here, though that's mostly going to be more of the burnt sienna color of orange. Just getting that contrast, so when we put those light colors over, this will be the undertone, as it seems to be in his fur. Going a little further out than I actually see it above and below his eyes, because as I said, the lighter colors are not going to show up so well if we don't have enough of the darker values underneath. This is mostly going to be the little burnt sienna color, but again, I just want a little bit of that dark. And I'm pressing this in with my finger this time instead of blending it away, so I can get more layers over the top, but I want this to stay pretty sharp underneath. There's a little bit of a dark bit right there, but not much. And then we have a little bit of this coming out from the muzzle. gray tones were. Got the space heater on in the background. I hope it's just a little white noise and not annoying. I went back and looked over the video that I've already done, and it didn't seem to be. In fact, it might be helping block out other noises from the highway or from outside. We live very close to a busy road. So sometimes it gets a little noisy, even with all the windows closed. I'm just doing the edges here because that's what it seems to show me in the sides. Up here will be much more of the lighter fur coming in over the top than the brown. I don't see a lot of brown up here, just down below his chin. And that is helping to define those longer hairs around his chin. I'm going to do that a little bit here, just as an underlayer. Notice I'm just moving around his face to get those undertones in. I'm going to go down here and put a little more darkness, mostly between his paw and his body, just again so we can make sure that little leg is a bit different. Okay, back up here a little more. And then up into his other eye. Got a little bit of the darker tones going right into his eye area. And then up above, we've got some of this brown and more of that burnt sienna color that need to be laid in before we start putting that light stuff on. The light stuff is my favorite part because that shows that we're on the home stretch and we're almost finished. It just amazes me how much difference it makes. Just that final layer to get the detail in. So sit back for a second and look and see where I needed to get some more darks in. Looks like there's a little dark curl right there. All right, I'm just going to push it in with my finger. Again, it's easier to do on Pastelmat. I don't do a lot of rubbing with my finger blending on Pastelmat because it'll tear up your fingertips. It's textured enough. Kind of like the UArt sanded paper that way, and then it doesn't feel as sandy as the UArt, it still will tear up your little fingers. All right, now we're going to come back in with the burnt sienna colors. I'm going to use my Carbothellos because they're softer, but again, if you only have the generals, use them. And then we're going to start back over here again. I don't see any real orangey sienna-y stuff up here in the ears. Just maybe a couple little places. But right in here, not too much. It's could be overwhelming and look too orange if you use too much. In fact, I might jump in with a more yellow ochre color so it doesn't orange up too much. There's a spot where I noticed I didn't get enough of this darker color coming down from the eyes. And there's also this coming down from the eyes. Now note, I'm kind of pushing some of that out of my way. Sienna, the generals. Generals are harder, so sometimes you can get a sharper line with them, but sometimes they're not soft enough when your tooth is almost full. So we've got that band orange in there, and when we put the ivory over the top, that's when you'll really see the orange pop out from underneath. Go back to my ochre. Sort of pencil. This one is, I can't even see, there's a glare. 620, I think, burnt ochre. I'm going to really push this down in there because I want that beige to be able to come over the top. There's a lot of layers on this pastel mat. If you're using another paper, you may have already filled your tooth up by now and be unable to fill anymore. In that case, you might want to use a brush or something else to pull a little bit of the color out of the tooth of your paper in order to get those final light layers on. I'm just putting a tiny bit of this color down in the body just for continuity, even though when you see it in the shadow, it just isn't really there. But part of that's the photograph itself having a few flaws in color and tone. So we want to make sure our colors are consistent, even if they're not quite the same in the photograph. More orange on this side. Okay. Now I'm just going to sit back for a second and take another look. And except for a few places where I'm going to need to put a little black, in the finishing touches, it looks like I'm ready for my light colors. I think first, you may not have this issue right now, but right now I'm seeing that I need it to be a little blacker. On the very, very inside bits of this mouth before we put lighter over it. Looks a bit like his mouth is sewn shut right now. It's kind of Halloween-y. But plus, I want to make sure that cute little puppy dog kind of smile is happening. That's happening in the picture. Okay. I'll wipe that black off my fingers before I push in the rest of this. And then we are on to the finishing coats and touches, which is going to be the nice light ivory colors. So most of this, a little experiment here. Yeah, most of this is going to be in this super light flesh color. It's on the Carbothello at 681, which is light flesh tint, because there's a lot of this pinky color in his fur. And then I'm using an ivory, which is 105, which is just ivory. But our finishing colors, except for a tiny bit of white at the end for major highlights and a tiny bit of black at the end for major highlights, this is where we're going to wrap it up. So I'm going to start over here with these super light little highlights. I'm also going to redefine the edges of his ear. And then we're doing the fun part. Many of these individual hairs are running together, which is fine. You don't have to see the edge of every hair, but you want it coming down around and under these dark spots. And this is where you can press in pretty good. You don't have to be delicate, because you're not going to be putting a bunch of layers over the top. I'm using the tip only for the tiny little bits that are showing out there. We're going to use a white pencil to get some of that, even though his fur isn't white, just so we can have the contrast, because it won't look white over this background color anyway. It's going to blend a bit with the background, but it'll add that brightness that we want. Get that little hairline here. Now he's got all these sweet little bits of fleshy pink in his fur, especially up in here. I'm going to sharpen my pencil. Won't make you watch. Stop you for a minute. Okay, sharpened. Now, because I'm doing a few more fine points and hairs, I am sharpening my point a little bit using my little sander. And we'll go back in. over here is a little more of the beigey ivory, so I'm not putting too much of this flesh tone over there. And I'm going to bring it through here. More of the light ivory that I'm seeing in here, so I'm not going to put too much of the pinky stuff over here. Most of this pinky flesh color is on the top of his head, so let's keep moving up there, and then we'll switch out to ivory. And notice if I push, it makes the lines less harsh, but they're still there. You can still see the individual lines for the hair. Remember that little tuft is going to be here, and that'll be in the lighter ivory color that I bring that in. Referring very often to the photograph and looking to see where I see those kind of fleshy pink hair highlights that the light is reflecting on. I look more at my photograph than I look at the piece that I'm drawing. So refer back to your photograph often, because you do not want to get yourself off track and be concentrating down here and suddenly realize that you've put in things that aren't there in the picture. A little bit of that pink in the chin area. And I keep saying pink, it's really more of a fleshy, peachy color, but it's the flesh color. Just a tiny bit. seeing a little bit of the pinky color over here that the light colors will go over. Not much here. That's going to be really bright colors. And I don't think we have a whole lot down here. So now I'm going to put this aside for the moment. I'm going to just use my clean finger. Make sure your fingers are clean. To just barely press down so that I have enough tooth left on the top to lay in these brighter colors. All right, let's get started back with, now we're working with ivory. So in the general colors, I think there's an ivory or a sand. I would go as light as you can without being white if all you have is the general pencils, or just go for the white and blend it better. Now we're going to go in with these bright ivories. There's not as many over here. I think this ear is just about done and saturated. We're just going to put a couple white highlights in and a few. Other than that, I think we're good. Now, down in here, I'm just putting the suggestion of hair because it's a little smooth, but I want to keep that orange in there as much as possible. Same with up here. There's only an occasional bright ivory bit peeking through this rust color. And it looks like we've got, this is where we look really closely and see which of these little short hairs are poking toward his eye. And you want to make sure and keep your pencil clean while you're doing this, and use the sharpest edge you can find to put in those little highlights of hair that are barely crossing over in front of his eye. That's why I put it so black down below, so you could still see these little tufts of hair. Now these marks I am not going to be blending, because even though he looks very smooth, that's more the photo and the resolution of the photo than it is what you might actually see if you were looking this doggy face to face. So, I mean, I do always tell people that I'm doing commissions for, my picture can't be any better than the my drawing can't be any better than the picture you give me. However, that's not entirely so, but you really do want to make sure that you're getting the absolute best resolution you can. in some cases, the pet might have already passed, so you don't have a lot of options for pictures, and then you're just going to have to make stuff up. Really bright spot right there. Now, right in here, we have this tuft that comes out from the eye and leads up to a point. Doesn't have to be perfect, just needs to suggest it's there. And it's coming all the way over here. We'll get down here in all these nice bright things in a second. Notice I'm just following, again, the direction of the fur coming off his nose. I'm pulling these little wisps, not doing all of them. I'm going to use my bright white pencil. You might even, if you have a white charcoal pencil, sometimes that's a really good highlighting method because it really blends well. These ivories are really helping a lot. Now we have these two arches of hair over here. One that goes up like that into a point. Just have several little mini bits over here where the light's catching. Again, we're going to use a bright white to get the brightest of these, but we want to get these long. Hope the noise doesn't bother you too much. My poor long-suffering husband is actually off today, so he's not working up front, so he's trying to sneak around the house to do what he wants to do around me. So if you hear rustlings in the background, it's him trying to be sneaky, so he doesn't interrupt our tutorial. Now that little dirty hair has been kind of covered up a little bit. I might put it back in with the black, but I might let it go because I'm pretty sure the dog just had a dirty hair that day, so it's not really part of the color of his actual fur. I'm sure the owner would not be unhappy with me if I didn't put that in, but I want to put the direction of that hair in. Notice the hairs are very long, so you want to follow and get that length in there. You also want to make sure you're not perfectly uniform. This dog's hair goes a lot of different directions. Lots of brighter ivory colors here in his little beard and mustache. And it is kind of rough with the black already in there to not get black down in here. But try to keep your pencil clean. I keep a piece of paper towel where I can kind of scrub the extra colors off as I'm dragging them into that black. I don't know about you, but I enjoy doing the types of commissions where this animal is just so darn cute. A lot of people think that long hair is more difficult, but as long as you're following the pattern of the hair, I find it easier, frankly, than getting a smooth dog, a short, smooth-haired dog, because you're really getting these individual hairs in. I was talking earlier in this process about how I don't mind if people, when I'm doing a tutorial that's either one of my pores with an embellishment over the top, or with a Pixabay or other free use photo that I'm using, I don't mind if artists who do my tutorial find that their work at the finish is really good and want to sell it. However, reminder that this is a commission. It is not a free photo from Pixabay. So this is for an actual person. So while I have permission of the photographer to share this as a tutorial and for you to draw for your own purposes and practice, we do not have permission for you to go on and sell this piece. I'm a little looser about these kinds of things than many other art tutors and artists because, I mean, we all need to make a living and support each other, right? But for works that I'm using as tutorials that are also commissions, I do not give permission for this to become something you sell or that you turn around and give a tutorial for to someone else. But for my other pieces that are looser, especially like the embellishments and the acrylic pouring with embellishments over the top, they're never going to be the same. Never ever. So anytime I give you permission to sell your work, if it's good enough after a tutorial, feel free to do so. But again, as far as these commissions of individual pets, we don't have that ability to give you the right to do that. This is so cute, y'all. I have to say I'm kind of proud of myself. I've never done a dog that had tufts quite like this before. But I am going to use the white, like I said, to do some of those really bright highlights up here. And I'm going to move down into his body. Even though it looks browner down there, we really need to tie it in to his upper body, even though it's in shade. So we're going to lay those little hairs in the body back in. It doesn't have to be detailed like the head. It's blurrier because it's further back. And we want his little head to be the focus. But we do want it to be tied in with his coloring up top, even though it doesn't look the same down below. So I'm just giving the suggestion of the curls of his fur, and we're going to do a little more on his foot because it's coming forward. So we have creaky closets in this house. They already know you're in the background trying to be quiet, so it's okay. Notice I'm just looking at the curls of his fur on his foot. Not going perfect, but I'm making sure that they're going all those different directions. And just notice how this ivory over the top, I'm not putting any white down here when I get to white highlights up here. But this ivory just really brings out that little pose that he's doing. And his body, a little fluff ball down here. We're just going to hint. Just a little. It's very dark up in there, so we're not going to put a lot of ivory. And then out here, it's a little lighter. So we're just going to cover up some of that darker gray that we had. Now for this down here, I am going to press and blend it so it's not quite so stark. Because again, this is fine to be stark because this is the focal point. But this down here, we still want it to recede a little into the background. But that really helped a lot to bring his body so he doesn't look so disembodied, really. So he doesn't look like a floating head. So we're going to be using white, either the general white or the Carbofellow white. I'll put all these other bits in here. And then we also will be using black at the very end. Again, either the Carbofellow or the general, to just make sure we have the eyes and stuff going. Looks like his eyes have held up over our drawing, but we may add a little white, tiny bit in the highlights and maybe clean up a little of the black around the edges. So now all I want to do is use white in the little places where, like, you can see tiny tufts of his hair up there. Make sure you're looking closely because some of them are kind of curly. So I'm just going to do like one line just to brighten up. Only a few bits all the way around his face. All these little things that the sun is catching. Had to pause you for half a second. My husband was trying to get out the back door without making too much noise, so I paused it so he could escape. All right, see how that white really gives a good contrast to the layers underneath, but it doesn't look like a stark white. He doesn't have any white in his fur, this dog, but this fine white with these little tiny hairs just add a little realism to the piece that you otherwise might not get. Now I'm going to sharpen this with my sander quite a bit. I'm using my General right now. I find that its hard lead is really good for highlights because it doesn't break as much and because you can get a much sharper, finer point. I usually use a pencil sharpener to sharpen my Generals, but recently I tried to sharpen this white with a pencil sharpener and it broke my lead. I was incensed. I don't like wasting my pastels. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just looking and seeing these little spots on the edges with these little wisps of fur to brighten him and give him contrast between him and the wood. I probably will go back with the black back in there just a little bit to define, whoops, just get that out of there, to define the cracks between the log cabin building and the floor. But we'll just do that as a part of the end cleanup with the black pencil. Right now we're doing the white highlights. All right, up here, I'm just going to put a couple brighter whites. Not much, don't want a lot. But notice how that just the act of a couple bits of white, especially against the background, really give the illusion that you're drawing every single hair when you're not. I mean, we've drawn a lot of single hairs, but thank goodness we don't have to do the millions and millions that the dog actually has. As long as we give, and I'm going to press this in a little bit because I don't want it to be too bright and garish, but I'm going to put a couple little curvy bright highlights in here. I'm using the side of my pencil for the inside bits so that it keeps my edge sharp for these little wispy outside bits. I'm making that little tuft of hair in between his eyes just a little brighter. I'm not moving the pencil down into here much, just up here at the edges so you can kind of see where that little tuft is. It's kind of part of the cuteness of this little guy. He's got a good groomer. The groomer may be the owner, I don't know, but whoever's grooming him is doing an adorable little job. We take our little dog, we have a little Havanese, take our little dog to a groomer because he is way too twitchy for me to be comfortable grooming him myself, because I don't want to put his eye out. He jerks his head around and he twitches like a little maniac, and he acts like you're killing him. Okay, down in here we have I think I'm going to do this one curvy hair highlight. That comes across his nose because it's cute. But the other one, I'm not taking all the way down through his nose. I'm just giving a little hint of that one. Now I'm pressing this one in. I want that line a little harder. And then right over here. We're putting in those fun, funky little curvy hairs. They're brighter on this side because the sun's coming from this way. I want to soften those. They're not too harsh. The end of that kind of goes out in a few different ways. I'm going to pull that ivory back out just to soften that a little bit. That is not my ivory, that is yellow. Not that it hurt it, but just to soften those hairs a little bit and not make them so stark white, because they're not. Put a little tiny point on there. That was just my other white, my Carbothello white. Kind of using both. Now, I'm strategically using this white to continue lightening up this bit, but also showing those little wispy hairs that go over his mouth. A little less jack-o'-lantern-y now. Few brighter wispy hairs in here. Like I said, not quite as many as over here. And this is where we really pull these little curls out. And really give the difference between his chin here and his neck down there. I'm just looking at the shapes that these hairs are making. I'm not doing the exact shapes that I see in the photo, but some semblance of those similar shapes that I see, because his smile, frankly, in this photograph is almost as important as the expression in his eyes. I would say it is as important. Notice how that nose has just blended right in and really looks good, she says as she goes and corrects a couple spots on the nose. I don't want to overdo it, but there are a few little places. Okay, what I'm going to do right this second is I'm going to stop for a few minutes, and I encourage everyone to do this. I'm going to stop for a few minutes and I'm going to look at my piece as a whole. I'm going to stick it up next to my picture on the laptop. I'm going to see if there are any glaring place issues that I want to touch up or that I want to fix, if there are any fixes necessary, if there's anything more I want to do in his fur. I can see right now that I do want to add a little more shadow under his foot just to ground him because his foot is standing on there, and I want to add a little more differentiation between the top and side of this piece of wood down here. Are you in my frame? And I also want to get a little more gray-black in here, but I may want to look and see, is there anything more I want to do to his eyes? Is there anything more I want to clean up, like here I was doing on his nose? So I encourage you to take a few minutes, if you're working on this with me, alongside me, to step back, clean off your hands, and spend 15 or 20 minutes, or even walk away for an hour and do something, and then come back to this with fresh eyes and see if there's anything left that you want to do. And I'm going to do this. I don't sign my work until I know I'm completely ready to finish it up and take the tape off. So that's what I'm going to do. Of course, I'll be back with you instantaneously, but I encourage you to take a pause as well. I've taken a few minutes to look it over and compare it to the little the photo, and there are a few things that I want to touch up, but nothing really super duper. Like over here, just put in that line across the floor. I'm not really going to do a whole lot more with the background. I do want to make sure that my eyes are looking good. And one of the things I noticed is that I don't have his little eyelashes in here. So I'm going to use the burnt sienna in my general pencils. You can use the closest burnt sienna in the Carbothellos if that's what you have too. First, I'm going to make sure my blacks are black. And I've blown up the picture on my computer screen just to make positive I'm getting every highlight and low light in there that I can get. Same on the other side. They can get a little smeary, blurry as you're working, so just to touch it back up again. And make sure I've got enough darks as well as enough lights. Now I'm going to go ahead and put these little tiny hairs in here. I'm not showing up very nicely, so I'm going to get my softer Carbotello in there. If you find that you have a little too much pigment, just blend it in, push it down, and do it again. I'm actually going to get a yellow just because you can see it a little better. I'm going to turn this so I can drag it down. It's not super duper. It's not as dark as in the picture, but it's there and it's decent. Now, I know there's one tiny little highlight right there in the corner of his eye that I see with the photo blown up. There's this, and I'm just gonna put a tiny bit of white next to that light blue in his highlights that we did earlier in his eyes, just to bring them out a little bit more. And that's super duper dark. It looks like we got a little, his eye became less rounded, so I'm just going to touch that up. You may not need to do any of these fixes in yours if you've already done them. I just want to make sure that I've got them in there and that my little white hairs and fuzz and highlights are all completed. Just putting a few more wispies out here where I see them in the photo. Make them a little less even and straight because his fur is not even and straight. I think there's one tiny bit of white right up there too. I'm going to push it in. Sometimes if you want a bright mark, you need to push in and just leave a little hunk of your pencil there. And then push it in with your finger just to make sure. I think let's see, do we have all the nose the way we want it. I'm looking to make sure. His little mouth. Have I got everything? Instead of gray, it's kind of rubbed out into a gray. I'm just putting a few of those darker blacks in there. Not a lot, just a tiny bit. So they don't look gray. So it actually looks black, like his mouth. And running a little more. His cute little fur. Over those marks. There's even a tiny bit of this blue that we kind of lost. Now this is just splitting hairs, really. I'm pretty much done. I'm just putting a couple things in that I think will add to, like his little light whiskers over in here. Just where I want to add a little more interest. And if you'll notice on long hairs, often the very end, unless it's been trimmed by a groomer, there's always a little crook at the end. They're not chopped off perfect. So make sure you get those little crooks. Now this guy has so much hair, if he has whiskers, they just blend in with his hair. So we don't need to worry about thin whiskers or anything like that. So before I mess it up, I think I'm gonna sit it up here and compare again. And I think after I do one more thing, this is that brown gray, just to make sure his smile stays in there. Get this more brown than gray. Those tonal values back in there between the whites. Make that contrast a little more. I think I'm going to call this done. Pencils off to the side. I put every pencil I've used in this project in this jar and not back into the carousel so that I can write them down for you so that you'll have the document of every color I used in this piece. Again, as I say, you do not need to own all of these colors. You can get a lower cost supply, and I do recommend the General's brand. Nobody's paying me for that. I just know that this was my first set of pastel pencils, and I really like them. They're harder, so they're not so soft to do some of the softer detailing with, but they're nice. They work. Now, what you want to do when you peel this up, when I taped this down, I kind of put the masking tape against my jeans a little bit just to kind of get rid of some of the adhesive, but I also, so that it doesn't pull up any of the color on the pastel matte paper, I always start at the top corner and I pull very, very slowly. If you pull too fast, you might end up taking some of the paper with you, and I don't want to do that. And I have a little white mark that I used to mark out where I wanted to put my tape here. It didn't get covered with pastel, but that's okay because the matte board itself is going to cover it. When you get matte board that's pre-cut, which I always do, I got this one. This is 8.5 by 11. I got this one at my local Jerry's Artorama. But you can order them in 25 packs on Amazon, and you can order them. I order mine that come with the 25 matte boards as well as 25 backer boards for that size, and the plastic cellophane bags that you slip them in to keep them safe. Excuse me, I mat all my pieces because I do not use a fixative. I don't spray fix my stuff. When I'm working on pastel matte especially, you just don't need to, and it can discolor and make your colors too dark. It can even sometimes leave flecks and speckles, which are never a good thing. So I don't do anything to my pastels. I do I mat them and back them, and then I put them in that cellophane baggie so that they're protected until the owner gets it framed. I do not frame them because, number one, I don't know the owner's taste. Number two, that cuts too much into my budget. Matte board doesn't cost me more than $1 to $2 per whole mat, so that doesn't cut as much into my budget. And the reason I'm waiting to sign it until I've put the matte board over it is because when you buy pre-cut matte boards, and don't cut your own, I don't, because that's just too much hassle to me. But when you buy pre-cut matte boards, for example, if I want an 8.5 by 11 inch opening, they are always pre-cut to go a little bit smaller than that in the opening so that it covers all of the edges of your picture. Isn't that a nice, pretty clean line now against that brown paper? So I don't have any other color matte right now except the black, but the owner can choose to change it if they decide to. Now, if you wanted to get rid of these marks, you could probably pick them up with your kneaded eraser, but I don't know why you would need to, because what I do, I wonder if I put my tape, I guess I put my tape back into my cold studio. So what I'm going to do, since this is a little smaller an opening than the actual picture, I'm going to lay it down over my picture so I can decide exactly where I want it. Since it's a little smaller, my picture goes outside it a little more. And I'm doing this so that when I sign my signature on here, it doesn't end up under the mat board. I want to frame it in a way and mat it in a way that you can still see my artist signature. That's kind of a, you know, it's kind of an important thing to know. So there have been a few times I sign usually the lower left. I try to keep the signature in a place that's, if not invisible or obscure, it's not messing with the actual picture itself. I'm left-handed, so I tend to sign near the left-hand lower side, and I usually will sign in a color that's not deflecting from the piece, that blends in a little bit better, but I don't want it to blend in so much that you can't see it, so I'm going to test. Yeah, that's pretty good. So I just signed my name, and I tilted it because that's how I'm left-handed, and I don't write upside down like some left-handed people do. I have to write right side up, so I just tilt my paper the opposite direction of a right-handed person. I had a teacher in school that tried to make me right-handed once, and then my mother, like a mother bear, went in and told her that was not going to happen. My mother herself is a very shy, retiring woman, and also left-handed, but she was not having it. That was back when I guess people thought left-handed was bad somehow. So let's see. She had had a teacher herself. She grew up in the 50s and 60s, and she had a teacher herself who was tried to make her do everything with her right hand and break her of being left-handed. So she wasn't having any part of it. So anyway, this comes to the end of your tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you stick around for more tutorials in the future and more bonus content as well for your tier. And I hope you have learned some techniques and tips from this. And I would love to see you in the chat to discuss it. And I would love to see your finished works if you do this. Have a great day.